Hello everyone and welcome back to day 2 of Events Week. It is so great to have you all here. My name is Hannah and I'm part of the CE.
Hi guys, I'm Robin. In keeping with our searching theme throughout the week, today we're going to be searching for dignity. If all we are is matter, do we really matter? Today we're going to be having an interview with Professor John Wyatt from UCL. He's a medical professor and a really interesting and amazing guy. We'll also then have a talk like yesterday with Niv, where we'll be going through do we really matter? What does life mean in a way? And then after this, we'll have a live Q&A where we will be having Professor John Wyatt with us for the Q&A.
So now we'll be starting with the interview with Professor John Wyatt and Niv. So hope you enjoy.
Good evening and welcome to another event at Searching. And this evening, we're really privileged to be joined by Professor John Wyatt. He's the Emeritus Professor of Neonatal Pediatrics at UCL and a specialist in medical ethics. And he'll be thinking with us tonight in this little interview about some of the questions we're raising as we ask this question: if we're only matter, do we even matter? So Professor John Wyatt, thank you so much for joining us.
Great, it's good to be here. Thank you, Niv.
Wonderful. Well, we're thinking tonight about human dignity. What questions has your professional life raised for you when it comes to human dignity?
Yeah, well, dignity is a sort of strange word, isn't it, in our culture? But certainly, it's a kind of code word in medical ethics because it really refers to the fact that human life has a unique, special quality, a value, and so. When we're talking about human dignity, we're really talking about why do human lives matter? And this is a very serious question, not just for philosophers, but also for medics and for medical ethicists, because in my professional career, you know, I've had to wrestle with how that actually relates to clinical decisions about should we switch off the life support machinery, how do we make those decisions, who's responsible for those decisions. And particularly in my work has been working with very sick babies, some extremely premature babies, some brain damaged babies, and so on. And so the question is that I've had to wrestle with is how on earth can we decide how much a life is worth, and at what point is it okay to say enough is enough?
And is that the kind of thing where you went into medicine with a fully formed understanding of what makes a life worthwhile or not? Or is that something that you've had to figure out along the way? Have there been moments where you've been confronted with that question and it's really weighed on you that you needed to have an answer?
Yeah, absolutely. I went into medicine. I did have a sense of call, quotes, vocation, a real a desire to use my scientific skills and interests for the good of humanity. But I went, to be honest, I went into the field of pediatrics and caring for newborn babies just because I love children and because it's a very exciting and rapidly changing field of medicine and technology. And it's really only after I got in it that I realized I was in some kind of ethical maelstrom. All these difficult, challenging technological, ethical issues were coming up. And as technology advances, it seems that it raises the question time and again, what does it mean to be human? And so I felt that I had to sort of increasingly study the questions of ethics and philosophy and religion and try to come to my own views, but also then how to help other people in this extraordinarily interesting but contested area.
Thanks so much for that. When you talk about technology raising the questions of what it means to be a human, what goes wrong if we don't have an answer to that? Or if our answer to that is something we haven't really thought about? What's at stake if we're not giving this question real consideration?
Well, I mean, everything is at stake about our civilization. Our civilization is based on the view that human life is special. I mean, I often think that from a Darwinian point of view, my whole life has been dedicated to an anti-Darwinian processes. From Darwinian thinking, the kind of babies I care for are clearly nature's duds. They are biologically unfit to reproduce. And from an evolutionary point of view, the correct thing to do is to help them disappear so that the fittest specimens of the species can survive. And yet, I, supported by our civilization, supported by the NHS, supported by our tax money, have been devoting all my efforts and energy and medical technology and so on to try and preserve the life of these pathetic biological specimens. And so our whole civilization is based on this belief that human life is somehow special and precious.
And that belief is something that obviously arises from, squares with your own Christian faith. Were you a Christian going into medical sort of life, study and practice, or was that something that happened along the way?
Yeah, I was brought up in a Christian family, but to be honest, I always felt that I'd been rather brainwashed. And it wasn't until I got away from home and was able to go to university, and actually I started studying physics, and that I had then really the opportunity to sort of think for myself. And I had a kind of life crisis where I really wasn't at all sure what I believed, and whether all this religious mumbo jumbo could actually hang out. But rather to my surprise, I discovered that the more I tested and challenged and questioned the Christian faith, even in a scientific context, that actually it could hold up, and that it provided some profound and interesting and compelling answers. And so it was really at my time of university, my first year at university, that I really decided I was going to be a Christian. And it was really after that that I then had quite a strong sense that I wanted to change, was being called to change from medicine, from physics to medicine, associated with this period of turmoil, questioning. And I think, I know most people watching this are students. You're at university, and now is a time to think about these big questions. Now you're out of parental control and brainwashing. Now is the time to think for yourself.
Yes, absolutely. And that's what this whole week is, an opportunity to think for yourself and ask those questions. You may still be at home, I suppose, if you're tuning in to remote.
Yeah, perhaps I'm wrong. The parental brainwashing is still going on.
But this week, at least, you have a chance to break free. Thank you so much for that. That's a really helpful insight. And it leads me to my next question. When it comes to questions of providing care for others, one of the approaches that seems very wise is to keep things value neutral, faith neutral, and actually to leave the sort of religious mumbo jumbo, as you put it, out of the picture. Is that something you agree with for yourself?
Well, short answer, no. I mean, but it is a very contested area. So the whole development of the specialty of bioethics in the West is based on an Enlightenment idea. The idea is that we just have science and rationality. We can work out ethics. We can work out what's the right and what's the wrong. And basically what 200, 300 years of philosophical history has taught us is that it doesn't work. You cannot use science and rationality to work out what is right and wrong. As I illustrated, we can't use the science of evolution to work out whether we should care for a brain-damaged baby. And so in order to do ethics, you actually need some presuppositions. You need some fundamental presuppositions. And the danger with this view of secular neutrality is it smuggles in a whole load of presuppositions without being honest about them. So I would much prefer for us to have an honest debate where we discuss our separate presuppositions, our fundamental beliefs. Everybody has faith, everybody has beliefs. Even so-called completely neutral scientists actually have a whole series of beliefs which you can unpick. We need to be honest about our beliefs and then work out together in a society where we have all these contested ideas, how can we agree together on what is right and what is wrong? And that's a very challenging and fascinating question. But I think being honest about our fundamental beliefs, and that includes our religious beliefs, is important. There is no place for neutrality. There's no kind of Olympian summit from which you can look down, just neutralize the people. They have beliefs. I just follow the science. It doesn't work. You can't do it that way.
Thank you. So here's a question to make it really personal for some of us. What then if I am someone who really does hold to that evolutionary framework of how we got here, and at the same time, I don't even think it's questionable that we ought to care for brain damaged babies? What happens if I'm inconsistent with my sort of big scientific presupposition and also how I want to put that into practice in the world? What should I do with that inconsistency?
Well, and that's the question, isn't it? And I think what we need to ask ourselves is it important to be consistent in our thinking? Is it important to be coherent understanding of the world? Or am I happy to have, on the one hand, my science, which says, the universe is completely meaningless, there's no meaning on one side, and then I'll say, nonetheless, I'm to pretend as if human beings are special. I'm going to pretend. There's a lot of people who argue that's what we should do, that that basically we just have a fantasy. We know it's a fantasy. We know there's no reality here, but let's pretend. Let's all have this myth that there's such a thing as good and evil. Now, is that intellectually satisfying? For me, it's just not satisfying. I feel we need to have a coherent understanding of reality. And what, for me, the Christian faith gives me is actually, it provides that. It doesn't solve all the problems. There's all sorts of questions and challenges and difficulties which I wrestle with and continue to wrestle with. But fundamentally, it provides a worldview, a way of understanding reality, which makes sense.
Thank you so much. To make things even more personal, I suppose, for a lot of us, perhaps if we're students and we're experiencing the strange new world being taught remotely and so on, one of the challenges that comes home is that some of these questions of value and the dignity of humans and all those things, it isn't just something abstract out there happening to other people. It's something that comes alive for us when it comes to challenges with mental health and with what's going on for us personally. What does your Christian faith help you with when it comes to talking about mental health, when it comes to the challenges that people experience on that level?
Well, one of the things that both my medical experience and my personal experience and my Christian faith teach me, and that is that human beings are incredibly fragile and vulnerable. We're not these confident, in control beings that we sometimes like to project. And, I have my own interest in psychiatry, and that's not because I'm a professional psychiatrist, but because I've been a psychiatric patient. And a number of years ago, I had a major psychiatric breakdown, which was very much related to the stress of my work, the responsibilities I was carrying as a consultant, and my work as a research scientist. And it was an extraordinarily painful experience, but it's actually taught me a lot more about myself, but also about what it means to be human, and recognizing our fragility and our dependence. So I think it's true that many people, many students are struggling with mental health issues of anxiety, depression, and the Christian faith doesn't give us any kind of neat answers to these deep problems of suffering. But what it does do is it points towards a God who actually enters into the experience of suffering, a God who is not detached and alien from suffering, but someone who, and that's been my personal experience, that I went through a period of deep darkness, and it took quite a long time for me to get my head around what had happened to me. But gradually it's given me new insights and understandings about the profundity of suffering. But the fact that one of the most wonderful things about Christianity compared with other world religions is that it takes suffering very seriously, but it says that God experiences suffering himself and we can enter into that experience. It brings us closer even to God himself.
Thank you so much. That it's really fascinating to hear how these things haven't just been theoretical for you either, but they've been developed by your own experiences. If you could go back in time and tell, I don't know, undergraduate, well, you weren't Professor Wyatt back then, John, what would be sort of the one nugget or lesson that you would have to offer from all these years?
I mean, it's incredibly interesting, difficult question. I think I would want to say that for me, looking back now, it is genuinely true that Jesus Christ is a kind of explanatory key that unlocks the meaning and the significance of the universe and of why human life is precious in all the confusion and challenges and mystery of the world. There is a foundation we can rely on. For me, and that's Jesus.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time this evening. And thank you so much for sharing some of these things. I know you've written a lot and people can go and find out more about your own contributions in various places. But thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Wow, I really enjoyed that interview. What Professor Wyatt said at the beginning about how ethics really is so linked to science, and that we really do need to discuss our starting points, the ethics at the beginning, before making all these scientific decisions, really resonated with me.
Yeah, I have to agree. I just found it so fascinating how Professor John was just talking about how life is more meaningful than just existing and having to be healthy and stuff. How we can't just assign value based on a purely scientific standing, that we have to bring emotion into it because it is an emotional topic, and it can't just be that life is meaningless if we don't think it's worthy of living.
100%. And if you want to find out more or see more of Professor Wyatt's research, he's got podcasts and articles all on his website, which is johnwyatt.com. And yeah, I definitely recommend that you go and check it out.
Yeah. So guys, now we're going to have a talk like yesterday with Niv. We're just going to be going through, is life meaningful? Are we more than just specks of dust? And so yeah, he's going to be exploring that and what that means. So yeah, see you after that.
Our question this evening is, if we're only matter, do we even matter? It's a really good question. If we rule out any God, any mind or purpose behind our cosmos that we can't find in the physical universe, then we only exist due to a chance cocktail of time and matter. That applies to our universe and to us. And if that's true, in what sense do we matter? I quoted him last night, Professor Stephen Hawking. Let me quote him again. First, a lovely picture of him, if you needed the reminder. This is something he once said in an interview. The human race is just a chemical scum on a moderate-sized planet orbiting around a very average star in the outer suburb of one among 100 billion galaxies. We are so insignificant that I can't believe the whole universe exists for our benefit. To make sense of who we are in life, there are big questions that we need to answer. Whoever we are, whatever we believe, questions like, where have we come from? Where are we going? What are we here for? And this position that says we're only matter has answers for all those questions. Where have I come from? Nowhere. A blind process of natural selection over millions of years has produced me, for no other reason than survival. Where am I going? Nowhere. Speaking as an individual, death will be the end, and after that, nothing. And as for the universe as we know it, entropy guarantees that, however long it takes, everything will cool, everything will dissipate. What are we here for? Who knows? Enjoy it while it lasts, whatever that means. Just a chemical scum. That's where we're left if we're only matter. And that's what I used to believe when I was an atheist. But is it true? And if it is, what kind of life is possible for us? What I want to try this evening is seeing whether saying we're only matter actually makes sense of us. So here's one question to help us do that, building on last night. If we are only matter, then why should we trust what we know? It's obvious that our experience of the world goes beyond what a matter-only approach can show us. Here's the philosopher Roger Scruton, picture of him there, passed away, Sir Roger Scruton. And here's something he says that will help us, and it's about music. He says, music is certainly part of the real world, but it is perceivable only to those who are able to conceptualize and respond to sound in ways that have no part to play in the physical science of acoustics. It is just as absurd to say that the world is nothing but the order of nature as physics describes it, as to say that the Mona Lisa is nothing but a smear of pigment. None of us would deny that music has reality, that the Mona Lisa is more than a smear of pigments. The person who couldn't recognize those things would actually be missing out on reality. They wouldn't be sharper and more informed. And so Roger Scruton concludes like this. The cosmological path points beyond the edge of the world, as science describes it, to a place where another kind of question can be asked. A question that cannot be answered with a cause, but only with a reason. The question, why, asks of the world as a whole. Our biggest questions cannot be answered with a cause, but only with a reason. In a universe of time, matter, chance, and nothing else, we have nothing but causes. But nobody can live as if reality were nothing but causes. Some of the questions we matter most demand reasons, and we end up asking the question, why, all the time. And it lacks all curiosity and all reason to insist point blank that why questions don't matter. That's why nobody can be consistent when they say that all we are is matter. Here's Professor Richard Dawkins, picture of him there, and this is something he famously wrote in River Out of Eden, and it's a line that we'll come back to a couple of times, I think. He wrote, "The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference." I think that's a good summary, a well-written summary of the idea that all we are is matter. But there's a whopping inconsistency here, and it's the word we. The universe we observe, the properties we should expect. Hang on, where do we fit in? In this very passage, you find someone who isn't blind, because I think Professor Dawkins would be offended by that suggestion. Who isn't pitiless, because to use and understand that word means you can't really be pitiless. And above all, who isn't indifferent. That's the very last word anyone would use to describe Richard Dawkins. So why can't we live in the world we think is there? Why all the inconsistencies? Because if we're right that reality is meaningless, then that means that all the things we care about most are meaningless too. Which leads to another question. If we are only matter, why take human dignity seriously? Tying into our big question this evening and all the things Professor Wyatt said earlier. William S. Burroughs, the writer, picture of him there, once said this: "Evolution did not come to a reverent halt with Homo sapiens." So why do we act as if it did? As Professor Wyatt put it in his interview, why do we in our medical care routinely go against the grain of how we believe humanity originated and reality itself works? Some would argue that science can explain human dignity and provide the ethical foundations we need. Sam Harris, the American neuroscientist, wrote a book called The Moral Landscape, and maybe you can see the subtitle just there. Try to find a big picture. This is the audiobook version. It was subtitled, "How Science Can Determine Human Values." Using the formula of the well-being of conscious creatures, Harris builds a framework so that ethical living can be drawn entirely from science. And this is important to him because, as one of the so-called new atheists, this could be a God-free approach to ethics and change the game for moral philosophy. But does it work? A fellow atheist, the Australian philosopher Russell Blackford, and there's a picture of him there, has sympathy with Harris's project, but as an academic philosopher, he has problems with it too, and he writes this: "If we presuppose the well-being of conscious creatures as a fundamental value, much else may fall into place. But that initial presupposition does not come from science. It is not an empirical finding." Blackford is right. Questions of right and wrong can definitely be informed by scientific findings, but science alone can't account for their validity. And while it might tell a story that explains where some values have come from, it doesn't tell us whether or not those values are valid. Now, please don't mishear me. I'm not saying that if you're not religious, then you don't believe in morals. And I'm not saying that therefore you treat people any worse or that religious people are any better. We're asking a different kind of question. Why act that way? Why take human dignity seriously? What validates that concept? And that's the point. Human dignity is an idea we cherish. We know we couldn't live without it. It's the foundation of the modern world as we know it. Here's Thomas Jefferson, and if you're a fan from Hamilton, you'll know some of the lines from the Declaration of Independence. You might know them even if you're not a big musical theatre person. These famous words: "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Famous words. But analysing that, the historian Yuval Noah Harari, whose book Sapiens was all over every Waterstones I ever walked past, ever, makes this point. According to the science of biology, people were not created, they have evolved. And they certainly did not evolve to be equal. The idea of equality is inextricably intertwined with the idea of creation. The Americans, since it's the US Declaration of Independence, got the idea of equality from Christianity, which argues that every person has a divinely created soul and that all souls are equal before God. Harari doesn't believe that Christianity is true, but he's absolutely right to pinpoint it as the source, and we'll come back to that in a moment. But if that's right, where does that leave human dignity? Let me ask just one more question. If all we are is matter, why do we find it hard to live as if that were true? If that's the whole truth of you, you're only matter, why doesn't it square with the way we live? Why do we find it hard to live consistently with what we're saying about ourselves and others? Why do we value and trust our rationality? When it comes to other people hurting others, acts of, violence or oppression or exploitation, none of us treat that as if meaning is something we make for ourselves. We treat that as if that is objectively wrong. That's the problem. If we say that we're only matter and meaning goes no further than we do, then we're saying that the things we care about most aren't really found in reality. Love, hope, beauty, justice, rationality. These things are not found in material reality. You can't break open a rock or split an atom to find them. They're a thin veneer. Press into them and they're not substantial if all we are is matter. To give you an example, once Professor Richard Dawkins was interviewed on the topic of love, and he admitted that it was very important for gene survival. But when he was asked whether it could be a purpose of life, he said it was something grafted on, a superfluous excrescence on life. That's the reality. And the love that so many live for is just a veneer, an excrescence, an illusion to help them cope. Okay, could you live as if that were true? I've never met anyone who really does. If we're only matter, do we even matter? Well, how could we? How could I? Not in a way bigger than the four walls of my opinion and experience. And even if I matter to other people, and not everyone has that privilege, they too will join me in death. This idea that all we are is matter can't satisfy us. It can't make sense of itself, and it can't make sense of our experiences, of our longing to know. So tonight I want to say, don't accept a definition of you that leaves you powerless to understand the world, that keeps you from describing reality as you experience it, so that you can't talk about the things you most care about. What we need is to find a definition of us bigger than only matter. And the good news is, that's something on offer with Jesus. Let me come back to the opening of John's Gospel, which Professor Lennox helped us think about yesterday. This is from chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. Jumping down to verse 14. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We've seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. Here's the claim. Jesus is God making himself known in human history. The author of reality writing himself into the story. That's a claim that no other religion makes. And it has massive implications for you and me. The maker of matter, choosing to inhabit a material existence. A humbling step down for him, but an electrifying statement of dignity and worth for us, because you matter that much to him. To go back to where we started with Stephen Hawking, of course the universe doesn't exist for your benefit, but the one for whom it does exist values you this much. Jesus steps in the author of reality, writing himself into the story. And no other religion has ever made a claim that audacious. And if it's true, of course, it raises all kinds of questions. And at the Christian Union, those questions are welcome. Take them up this week. Follow them through at things like Curious. But if it's true, it also means that the whole story of you is so much bigger than only matter. So much bigger than chemical scum. And if God has come to us as one of us, then we can know that there is a meaning bigger than the one we make. In fact, we see we're far from meaningless. We've been made with purpose and intent. We are valued so much that our Maker chose to share life with us. There could be no higher statement of human dignity than that. That means that you matter, I matter, every single one of us does. It's not foolish to care about the hurting and the weak and the vulnerable. We don't have to abandon them to an impersonal force of the survival of the fittest. Whatever you're going through right now, all the struggles, all the worries, they matter to God because you matter to him. And as a result, you are right to trust your reason to make sense of the universe in which we live. You're right to value other human beings and see treating them fairly as a matter of right and wrong. See their dignity as something no one can argue away or negotiate. You're right to long for more than this world, even at its best, seems able to give. Jesus steps onto the world stage with an extraordinary and world-changing offer of love. That's the kind of offer that can make sense of the ups and downs of life, like Professor Wyatt was saying, or inform and power the work that he was doing, looking after premature babies. And if Jesus is the one he claims to be, then that means he can show us who we're meant to be and give us what we're longing for. And that's the astonishing thing Jesus says about us. That we were made by God to be known by God, to be in a relationship with him, to be valued by him, and to value him ourselves. And all our restlessness and searching and striving and dissatisfaction comes down to not knowing him like that. So of course you're not just a chemical scum. Like a masterpiece, you were made with precision and intent. And the one who made you wants to know you. Like a whale made for the ocean, you were made for God. And that's why God chose to make himself known in Jesus, so that we can be in our element again. You see, if God had made himself known primarily in mystical experiences, then those of us who don't feel spiritual wouldn't have a chance. If God had made himself known primarily in philosophical arguments and intellectual concepts, then those of us who aren't that smart would always be at a disadvantage. And if he'd done that, then he would show that he only really cared about our spiritual capability or intellectual capacity. But that's not what Jesus shows us. When we look at Jesus, we see a God who doesn't just value your spiritual capacity, intellectual ability, he values you. He doesn't ultimately want your good behavior or religious observance. He wants you. And so he doesn't give you a list of rules or abstract formulae. He gives you himself, something he does in dying for us. And this is not an assertion you have to accept blindly. This historical figure invites you to investigate him, to weigh the evidence for his claims, which is something we're going to start doing tomorrow night. But it might be that just listening to this tonight, you find yourself wanting to say yes to what Jesus has to offer. Yes to that life of meaning and purpose that comes from knowing him. And I want to give any of us in that position a chance to do that in the words of this prayer. You might not be ready for that. That's fine. Just listen in. But if you want to discover the love and life on offer in Jesus, please echo me in these words. Lord Jesus, you made me, you know me, you love me. You offer the truth that makes sense of the world and the love that makes sense of my life. You stepped into human history and became just like me. You died for me. You rose again that I could know you today. Come into my life. I trust you. Help me follow you from now on. Amen. Thanks so much for listening this evening. Please keep your questions at the forefront of your mind and chase them up with the Christian Union to find out more. Thanks. thanks so much for joining us.
I really enjoyed that talk, and what really stood out to me is that we do inherently know that there is meaning in this life, that we do matter. Just like how the Mona Lisa isn't just a random collection of colours and strokes, but it is something beautiful. We know that this world has got meaning and it has got value. And the ultimate statement of human dignity is that the God who made everything chose to become one of us in Jesus.
Definitely. If you guys want to explore any of these ideas and concepts that you've heard about tonight and maybe over the other nights as well, then there is a contact form in the description. Please fill it in and get in touch with the CU. We are running Mondays with Mark, where you'll be going through Mark's Gospel, Curious Cafe, where you'll just be going through parts of the Bible, typically the Gospels. And then we'll also be doing one-to-ones as well, where you can get in touch with an individual member of the CU and we can put you in contact with someone, and you can just meet up however you like and whenever you like.
I would definitely love to encourage you to fill out the form, the feedback form, and join any one of the 3 events going on. I think you'll find out more about Jesus and learn who he is and decide who he is for yourself. And finally, we'll move on to the last part of this evening, which is a live Q&A with Professor John Wyatt as well. So I hope you guys enjoy.
Bye, guys.
Bye.